Welcome back to Mystara, and what turned out to be a closer vote than I thought. You have chosen the real-world ethnicities of Mystara and how they fall on the map. There's a lot of real-world cultures scattered across Mystara. A large number of them don't fall in any real-world correlation in terms of location. So you're going to have Arabs next to Vikings, as well as ancient Egyptians adjacent to Irish and Welsh. Let's not even get started on the Hollow World. Well, actually, let's get started on the Hollow World, because that's the entire point of this video. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's see what ethnicity ended up where. I'm going to cover just the human cultures because slapping the Japanese culture on Rakasta and throwing them on the moon might be great for world building, but it's a little outside the scope of this review. Ditto the French Lupins and the English Rakasta on the Savage Coast, not to mention the Savage Baronies where everyone is Portuguese, Spanish, or Texan, regardless of race. And of course there's the Belkades of Glantry, which are Spanish as well. Australian Aborigines are represented by the Chameleon Men on the far side of Brune, but those are a lizard race instead of humans. So those are definitely real-world cultures, only with pointy ears and magic. Starting with Europe, this is the largest number of cultures you're going to find, all over the map for that case. The Thyacian Empire has the most number of cultures, starting with classical Romans that give the nation its theme, but that's also included as the Byzantine Greeks and the Holy Roman Empire, which is German. This gives a lot of weird cultural feel because the Hattians tend to have the traits of the Prussians with their attitude and often their style of dress. Thyacians love Greek names, so there's quite a few of the Thyacians that have word salad names that are common in the Byzantine Empire. In the Thyacian provinces, you're going to find the ones off of the Hollow World, which are definitively Irish and Welsh with their names. That and all the rain. Oh my god, there is so much rain on the Thyacian part of the Isle of Dawn. In other provinces, you will find the Ochilians, which are a hybrid of Korean and Chinese cultures, though there's not much information past a few paragraphs about Ochilia. The Pearl Islanders are one of the few dark-skinned races on the surface of Mystara. They're also one of the more obscure races from the real world, being Melanesian. Melanesia is an island chain consisting of Papua New Guinea and several other islands to the northeast of Australia. They're most noted for being the only dark-skinned race in the world where blonde hair is a naturally occurring trait. In the real life, the rate of blonde hair is about 25%, but this is being a fantasy game, and every character wants to stand out, so expect any person playing a character from the Pearl Islands to be blonde. Going north, you come to Yalarim, which is a mixture of Arabic and Persian cultures. Unlike a lot of older settings, there are noted differences between the Persians and the Arabs. Yalarim has several ethnicities, including the raiders that are all that's left of the Egyptian-styled Nithians. The Yalari have Persian architecture in their larger settings, but the nomadic tribes are more like Bedouin and other Arabic cultures. Going north of the Arabian and Persian cultures leads you to the biggest geographic jump in cultures as you go straight from Iran to Sweden in the cultural styles. The northern reaches, and by extension the Haldonic Freehold, are Scandinavian in nature, complete with Jarls and raiders. Vestland represents the later Viking periods, with their focus on merchants, while Osland and Solderford represent the Viking cultures at their peak. The setting could have had slight changes to the nations representing different types of Viking cultures, like Danish, Frisians, or Swedes, but that might have been too much to put in a single book. Heading west from the northern reaches, you drop into Ethengar, which is so Mongol it's not funny. It's a small nation compared to actual Mongolian, which causes some problems because of the amount of animals raised by the Ethengar. There's too many for the small nation that they possess. Ethengar is 57,000 square miles compared to Mongolia, which is 604,000 square miles. The Ethengar tribes are based on the actual Mongol tribe, just scaled down in size. The oddity of the Ethengar is their location. They're an Asiatic people surrounded on all sides by European-styled nations. Ethengar's Mongol culture spills slightly into Glantry, which contains the largest number of cultures in a single area. Glantry is described as fantasy Yugoslavia because, taking out the fantasy elements of the Erewhon and the Alsatians, you still have the Flemish Bergthoven, the Scottish Crown Guard, the French New Aveyron, Romanian Moldavia, Mongol Kandahar, Germanic Alban, the Spanish Belkades Elves, as I've mentioned previous, the Italian Merchant Prince area of Corins, 10 different and wildly motivated areas crammed into a small space, and it's no wonder Glantry is considered one of the best D&D nations from any setting. Speaking of Italian city-states, this brings me to Derican, where the culture is largely based on Renaissance Italy, though the names are very much not Italian. The highly capitalistic focus of the nation, as well as the governmental structure, resembles that of several of the merchant states, but it's not a complete match, as some of the names tend to be generic fantasy or taken from various real-world cultures. In the fluff, this is justified by having Derican being one of the most diverse nations. Every one of the different human races comes to Derican to make a fortune, and they tend to interbreed fairly a lot. To the southwest, that leads you to the Etrugan lands, where 5 unique American Indian cultures wait for you. With the exception of the Aztec-based Tiger clan, all of the other clans are based on tribes found mainly in the United States. The clans are taken from all over the U.S., with the eastern Cherokee sharing the plateau with the plains-dwelling Comanche and the desert-dwelling Navajo. South of the plateau, there's the Pacific Northwest-inspired Turtle clans and the obvious Aztecs of the Tiger clans. In real life, these tribes had almost no contact with each other because of their location, but in Mystara, they are cousins and neighbors. Heading over the ocean to Irindi, you will find an amalgam of Polynesian cultures representing the islands, as well as Anglo-Australian culture being represented. The Polynesians take heavily from the Samoans, Hawaiians, Maori, and Tahitian cultures, among others. The differences are subtle, but for those native to the nations, they were recognizable as such. The last nation in the known world that isn't just a fantasy creation like the Minarethad guilds is the Grand Duchy of Keramikos, which is split between the Byzantine Greeks and the Eastern European Slavics. The Traladaran people are more akin to Serbians than Poles or Ukrainians in style. They tend to be Slavic stereotypes, complete with their superstition-heavy beliefs. For areas outside of the known world, before I get to the Savage Coast, there's a few that have to be mentioned. The Thyacians are invading the hinterlands in the continent of Devania, which are based heavily on the ancient Gallic people. It's ancient Rome versus Gaul, which does make a lot of sense. The Alphatians are sharing their culture with the Genites, which are obviously the Scythians, and by sharing I mean brutally enslaving. There's also some pre-Ottoman occupied Greeks on the Scothar coast, but little is known about them. On the Savage Coast, the biggest culture is the Iberian culture, with almost all of the smaller nations being either Spain at one point in its history or colonial Portugal. The lone exception to that is Cimarron, which is clearly Republic-era Texas. There's problems with the setup as the Spanish theme glosses over all the races found in the era, so the dwarves, elves, and hen just adopt the human culture with little variation, leading to the feeling that the writing got a little lazy. The other Savage Coast nation with a real-world amalgam is Robrin, which has a heavy Frankish feel with just a little bit of Celtic influence. The Hollow World has a ton of real-world cultures that were taken from the surface world. This includes the only races that would have normally been from Africa. The African equivalents in Mystara were located near Blackmoor before the huge kaboom. To save them from a hot radioactive death, the black races were relocated to the Hollow World. This, of course, traps them in cultural stagnation, but it beat the alternative at the time. The Hollow World nations are scattered across the map even more than the surface world because the Immortals wanted to see how the cultures would interact with each other. That's why you have classic Greeks, tribal Zulus, and the Aztec Empire at its full power in a 3-way standoff over supremacy of the Hollow World. Aside from that, there's a whole host of other cultures from ancient real-world history. The Antalians are early Iron Age Vikings. The Krugel Orcs might be orcs, but they are also Mexican orcs. The Kogalor dwarves are Swiss in comparison. The other human cultures include the Incan-inspired Oltecs, the Bronze Age Slavic Traldar, as well as more Egyptians and the Scythians. Unfortunately for the Hollow World, outside the Greeks, Aztecs, and Egyptians, there's not a lot of information on the rest of the setting. That's the rundown on all the Mystara cultures cribbed from the real world. As you can see, there's a lot. Mystara did avoid just blending most of them together, like having distinct versions of the Persians and Arabians in Yalarum. There are a few blended cultures like Ochili and Irindi, but those are the exception. This gives Mystara its unique setting feel compared to other places like the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk. Our next contestant on the Mystara is Right show is going to be from my 1005 timeline with the nation of New Angmar, the new surface shadow elf nation replacing the Broken Lands. Feel free to vote for the other options as well, but until next time, remember, we are all Spartacus.